Hi everyone, it's Di in my living room coming to your screen, and it's really great to be able to enjoy this moment together at whatever time you're tuning in. Thank you for joining us. We've had some very big chapters conclude and close over the last few weeks, and one of those chapters is that lockdown has now concluded, and we're so grateful that as a result of that conclusion, the chapter closing, a whole new opportunity of a new chapter has opened. And so I hope that you're just enjoying all the freedoms available to you, that you're enjoying all the options that you now get to choose, and that there is so much joy returning to you and to your households. And for those of you who have travelled with us online and continue to travel with us now as a church online, we know that things are also starting to open up for us and a new chapter for us as a church community. And I can't wait to explore that with you and show some of the detailed plans that we have, which are going to start to roll out over the next week or so. A chapter that is online that has closed is the series Let the Psalms Speak. So we have concluded that series, and we are so grateful for the gifts that it was for us. We just had a sense that during lockdown we needed to keep our community connected, and we needed to keep connected to the Word. And so the combination of letting the Psalms speak through many different voices has really been an engaging way for us to get through a very difficult time. And I just want to thank you all for travelling with us in that, and for turning up with your meaningful messages that have been part of the momentum that we've been in. Did you see what I did there? But seriously, it's been so great to have so much participation with that series, and also for all that people revealed about their lives through lockdown as they let the Psalms speak. It's been just such a gift to us, and I really want to say thank you for engaging in the way that you did. And so today we're just going to continue to move with Jesus into our new chapter. And for that reason, this message might be slightly longer than what we would normally have. And I just want to say, guess what? It's recorded, so you can pause at any moment and come back to it. There are so many options available to you that you can actually return to the message and take it in bite sizes. All I ask is that if you are part of the YVV family, and if Yarra Valley Vineyard is your home church, I just ask that you would watch the whole message, because this message is very key to the foundations of why we're making the decisions of coming back together in slow increments rather than all at once. And I want to share with you what Jesus has been saying to me as lead pastor, and also to our leadership team, that we just want to grow together and grow stronger together. So when we return, it's going to be with the fullness of the Spirit that God intended. So today, whether you're pausing now or whether you're pausing later, please just watch the whole message so that you can help us move together with great understanding about what Jesus is doing at this time. So part of what we're experiencing is that we're moving from isolation to participation. And Let the Psalms Speak was a little bit of an indicator about what the Spirit has been doing, that participation together is where we're going to see life over the next few months. And we have just seen a synergy of the Spirit as we see people bringing their gifts and bringing their wisdom and their insight, and that there are many voices strengthening us as we move forward into this new chapter. So let me just pray for you, and then we're going to have a look at a few things that Jesus is highlighting for us as a community. And so Jesus, you are the Lord and the love of our life. And so right now, we recognize you and we submit to your teaching, to your ways. You're the way, the truth, and the life. And Holy Spirit, I ask right now that your recognizable, tangible, beautiful presence would come alongside everyone that's tuning in right now to this message, and that you would lead us together towards the truth, towards the way, and towards the life that you have intended for us for this moment. Amen. So in this first section, I just want to think about some of the things that we've been missing. And we have missed things like face-to-face communion, face-to-face worship, worship in person that's going to actually surround you with the many voices of others joining in song and expressing their life and their love to Jesus. So as I've thought about communion, I just think that the Lord wants to remind us that those things that we've missed, even with all the creativity of being able to share those moments online, there is something that He's going to add to us when we come back together. And communion is a really good illustration of why that will be so. You see, this practice that we do regularly together, it's a practice that shapes any community, any of God's church, global church. And it is a practice that shapes us into being His faithful presence in a location. And so if we look at Luke 24 verse 25, if you want to flick that open, you can. It says that Jesus' presence was known. His presence was made known in the breaking of bread. And so it's around this communion table, it's around the Lord's Supper, it's around this sacrament that Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, that His presence comes and reorders our lives, and it reorders our lives together as a kingdom people. In a sense, it's a revolution that we come to every time we gather around the table, because this act that we do in remembrance of Him together, it also opens up the ability to shape a people to be His kingdom people in this world that we live in, because we're participating and experiencing and recognizing and receiving His forgiveness in that act. We're also receiving the healing for reconciliation, of restoration of relationship with our Father, and of the renewal of all things. And it's through this new covenant relationship that's expressed as we gather around the table and communion that we have God the Father releasing His Spirit so that we can live in this world as a redeemed community, showing onlookers what the new creation looks like. And we do this as we submit to the rule of the King, the one that heads the table, the one that presides over the table, the one that has given us this as a sacrament to do. He and His presence enables us to align to His rule and reign. And so our submission to Jesus is first, and then out of that spreads a submission, a mutual submission to one another. And that's part of the picture that I think that we're going to be learning about over the coming weeks, because Jesus still speaks around tables, and He's actually called us to do things and remember Him in specific ways. Let's have a look at John 13, starting at verse 1. We see this table, the very first way that Jesus speaks is through His actions. And so this series I'm calling Jesus Speaks. And the first point I want you to see with me is that Jesus speaks through actions. Jesus gets down on His hands and His knees as He comes to this table, and He washes the feet of His disciples, His friends' feet. He washes them to just demonstrate His servanthood and His submission. And He couldn't be more explicit about the way that He will relate and we will relate to each other in the future. It starts with mutual submission. This is where we see also in Luke 22, if you want to have a look there, verse 30, we see that Jesus is speaking about a practice that He wants us to keep. And He starts with an action of washing feet. It's not only the meal that we're gathering around, it's also to express our mutual submission to this new world that He has given us through His life, His death, and His resurrection. And this new world, which we participate in now because of Him, is founded on mutual submission. He's demonstrated that, He's spoken that through His actions. And this mutual submission to one another is really important under the lordship and kingship of Jesus. It's where Anyone who rules or leads first learns to serve. Anyone who rules or has power first washes feet and shows the action of mutual submission. And this is all done through the work of God that's happening in the midst of his people. We can't mutually submit to one another on our own. And this is part of the expression that the Lord's wanting us to continue to practice as we move out of isolation and into participation. As each person submits to Jesus, our relationship with one another and to him opens up. And I'm just saying there's a whole new chapter that is going to open up as we continue to follow his words and his actions of mutual submission to him out of our submission to our King. All our relationships are going to be changed and realigned out of this season. And all of those will be changed and realigned as we come to the table together. All of that is going to be mutually out of what we have and what we receive. And it's given to us through the King who has already shown us what submission looks like. And so as leaders, as we lead into a new space, we are doing it first out of this submission to Jesus and his ways. It's his lordship that's leading us and that we're aligning to. And as leaders, it's his presence that we're wanting to fully experience before we lead anyone elsewhere. And so part of our joy is that together we are with you in learning what it is to experience his presence amongst mutual submission. It's a place where we submit all our divisions, we take all our personal agendas into Christ's presence, and it all dies before him. It's a place where we sit together and we will tend to one another and to his presence. And the amazing social dynamics around his table, around his connection where he presides, is that he is going to conquer and subvert anything else that will get in the way that we are carrying. Because a new way of life starts around this table as we recognize and submit to his lordship, and we recognize and submit mutually to one another. So God's going to do that with us gently, and for some of us, he's going to do that in a way that will be really new and unfamiliar. And he's not going to impose himself or overwhelm us, but submission to his reign is actually letting go of some things. And we've had a whole series of practice through our lockdown of letting go. And so as we come together around the communion table and around the table where Jesus is presiding, we're also going to find that things are going to be exposed. And if you think about who sat at the table where Jesus was having the Last Supper with his friends, it's a place where his betrayer sat as well. It's a place that he welcomed someone whose heart was actually moving not towards him, but was moving towards selfish gain. And so it's going to be a messy, beautiful place as we gather back together, because as we submit to him in his kingship and his leading and presiding over our gatherings, he's also going to expose some things that are going to need to be laid down. And it's things that will be between us, and it'll be things between him and us that will be exposed and then beautifully offered, like we do when we come to communion. Everything we receive in forgiveness is received at that table, and then we get to release that out of that encounter to others. So one of the spaces that we are wanting to see strengthened as we emerge out of this into this new chapter, one of the places we'll see strengthened is Jesus being our host. Wherever we gather, we're listening for him to be the one that's presiding. Wherever we gather, we're looking how we can serve and wash the feet of others as he leads us. It's a place that's vulnerable, and it's a place where intimate conversation with him is happening. It's a place where a disciple lays on his chest while everyone else is watching. It's a place where in John 13 we see the disciple who Jesus loved actually reclined next to him and was so close. And so this space, I want us to think about that God's going to strengthen in the next number of weeks is going to be this close space with Jesus, because he is asking for us to become so close to him that we would incline our head on his chest and hear his heartbeat. Again, there are going to be people that's going to be awkward for, and the betrayer that sat at the table with Jesus, he was freaked out by that closeness and that intimacy. That was way too intense for him, and the presence of Christ and his words and his actions by his Spirit started to reveal the brokenness, and it created a hardness in that betrayer. And so we'll get opportunities of either moving closer to Jesus or moving away. And even now, you might be able to think of opportunities where your heart has moved closer to Jesus or further away, or others in your world where you've seen things have been exposed, and rather than getting closer, it's been too hard and they've gone off for personal gain. It's going to be messy, but it's going to be real. For me personally, an example of that is in lockdown, the first lockdown. One of the really tough places for me was at the meal table. As a single person, a single household, there was a lot of time for a lot of solo meals. And the first lockdown, I didn't do so well with it. It was really tough. I did not like it at all, and I just found it very, very hard. So when the second lockdown came, I was very aware I needed to change some things. I needed to get closer to Jesus rather than harder in my heart. So I discovered that meal times was going to be a place where I invited Jesus to my meal. And the second lockdown, I stumbled across an amazing time where meals became the highlight of my day, because I was inviting Jesus to come and be the host at my table. What a difference that made. During the second lockdown, those meals were no longer empty spaces. They were important parts of my practice, of my connection with Jesus, my friendship with Jesus. There was one week where we were having a whole week, and that meal time over that whole week, I divided up a whole list of Yarra Valley people, and I started to talk to Jesus at every meal about everyone that's a part of our home church, everyone that's part of this family. And so over the week, Jesus and I had a meal as if you guys are at the table with us. And I would be sharing the fun things I remember, the tough things I know of you and also you experiencing, and just the silly stories. And then me and Jesus would pray for you over that week during the mealtime. He was the host, and we included you. Even though you weren't present with us, you were, through our prayers and through our sharing of the stories. Another week, it had been a really tough week, and so that meal time with Jesus became me talking to him about the great needs that had come my way. So had been getting a lot of calls from people who were doing it really tough, those who were going through health crisis, those who were having housing issues, those who were experiencing heartache in relationships, those who were fleeing from domestic violence situations and had no support. These were the calls I were getting during the day. People who were experiencing loss and grief and disruption. These are the things that I brought to my shared meal experience with Jesus as the host. And these are the things that we then talked and prayed together. And it changed my day to have that shared meal with him. Because Jesus speaks as he hosts. And he is as close to the ones that he loves that will let him. He's as close to those he loves, as close as we want to be. You can participate in closeness in this season and strengthen your closeness. It's a close circle of friends that he has, and you're in it. So that's one of the distinct spaces that the Lord's talking to us about. He wants to come close at this time, and he wants us to choose to come close. He wants us to have a circle of closeness with him. That's the first part. And I am just aware that spaces are opening up for us to be able to share those close spaces with him. And we have experienced that in our homes. And there are 2 other spaces in neighbourhoods and also to those who are hurting, where he's also wanting to strengthen from our closeness, that we would strengthen those circles as well. So the second circle that I want to talk about, that we're already seeing God strengthening through his Spirit, is the circle of our neighbourhood where we gather and where we eat regularly. See, our neighbourhood is our next circle of relationships, and many of us start our week with our Christian friends, and we make sure we put our time and priority into worshipping God, into bringing our offerings to extend his kingdom within the reach of our neighbourhoods and beyond. We give him our love and our devotion, and our neighbours are all watching on. They are looking on, and we welcome them to our tables in our neighbourhood. You see, friends of Jesus, they form a circle and they're submitted to Christ's presence at the table, the communion table. And it's that close circle of intimacy with Jesus. Then there are openings in the next circle, and that next circle is not a closed circle, a close circle. This next circle is more like a dotted line circle where there are spaces between. This circle is porous. This circle is where the Christian in the world now becomes the host. Jesus was the host at the table in the close circle, and this next circle, the Christian is the host. The Christian is the one who typically meets regularly to share a meal and hospitality of Christ's presence, and then out of that extends a welcome to those that are watching on. It typically begins in our homes, and we've had a lot of experience of what Christ's presence is like in our homes. And now this next circle that has been also growing during lockdown, this is where the meal is actually initiated by the Christian. And any Christian can host this in their world. It's hosted by a Christian and always open and hospitable to strangers who are becoming a regular part of their lives. So Christ's special presence, his closeness, is then extended to the neighbourhood. If we look at Mark 6, we see in verses 30 to 35 just such a great illustration of this porous circle that's a part of our neighbourhood. Here we have in Mark 6, thousands of people are gathering around Jesus, and they're not yet part of the kingdom. But in verse 30, we see that close circle, the apostles gathered around Jesus. They were there too. So that intimate close circle is present among the crowds. And with people from all towns, they started gathering as well. It's the dotted circle. From all towns they gathered. Picture our public open spaces right now. Many people are gathering. Let's move on. Mark 6. So the disciples came together to Jesus and they reported a need. We know what the need was. It was send the crowds away because they need to get something to eat. This is where Jesus speaks. Listen to his words. Jesus speaks and directs them. In no uncertain terms, he says, you host the table. You give them something to eat. Jesus speaks and he says in verse 37, you give them something to eat. This is the dotted circle kicking in. The Christian hosts the meal. The Christian in the world, in the crowds, in the neighbourhood hosts the meal. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. And as we start this new series of Jesus speaking, they're the words for today. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. his generosity and his consistency, he's now saying, you show that. You show that and give them something to eat. Jesus, this personal God, speaks to his disciples. Jesus, this personal God, speaks through scripture, but at this moment he speaks again through actions by submitting to them and says, you give something. Through the mutual submission, again, he leads in a way, serving them to their best kingdom priority. You give them something to eat. The disciples in verse 37 are not quite sure what that means. And they say, are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give that to them to eat? And they assume they have to do everything. They assume they have to take control. They assume they have to provide out of their resources. But that is not what it means for a Christian disciple to host at the table. In a dotted circle, to host at the table, it's where Jesus shows them right now how to host. He says, Jesus speaks, his words are, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. He says, bring what you have. He speaks again. He says, nothing more, nothing less than what you have in the crowd. First example of crowdsourcing right there. And they find among the crowd 5 loaves and 2 fish. They bring it as an offering into the abundance of the kingdom through Jesus. Here's what he does. He takes the 5 loaves, he blesses them, he speaks blessing over their offering, he breaks them as part of the blessing, and then he gives it to the disciples for them to distribute. Those 4 words, takes, blesses them, breaks them, and gives it. It's that signal again, that sign towards communion, the first time that Jesus distributes through submission. He says this is a Eucharistic celebration in the thousands. It's the next dotted circle that you're a part of. He says these 4 words, take, bless, break, and give. That's what we are a part of. It's the source again. The close connection then is released to those who are in the wider circle. And again, it's the place where in the midst of a meal, people meet the abundance of the kingdom, the multiplication of the kingdom. All who ate were filled. There was an abundance of food left over. So here we see that a shared table extends the presence of Christ into places where curious onlookers are invited and others are participating by hosting those moments. So as Christians, we're here to practice this reconciled and generous life. And we're here with an expectation that onlookers, they're not going to get it straight away. They're not going to understand what's going on. This dotted line, it's messy. There are spaces between. People go in and out. We don't send anyone away. We invite everyone in. And people who might be in conflict within that dotted circle, they're part of the crowd of onlookers. And it's not our responsibility to do control or take anything away from their journey towards Christ. We invite them to be with us among Christ. We host them. We don't take control of the situation or the table. We facilitate these gatherings where around the presence of Christ, he's going to reorder things in the lives of those people in the dotted circle. It's his job, it's his role, and Christ is going to meet all our needs. He's going to meet all our needs and more. And this is what Jesus is trying to teach his disciple in front of a crowd of 5,000 people who are being fed and we're fully satisfied. So Yarra Valley Vineyard, as we move towards gathering together, these are really important things that Jesus is showing us, that we freely come together from isolation to participation. We're going to be stronger than ever, but we're also going to be very deliberate in making sure that all these practices are very present in our life together. And we're deliberately using a phrase called the Festival of Giving as part of an opportunity to remind us that we have this opportunity of a dotted line, a dotted circle, where people are coming and going and watching our regular lives. And the Festival of Giving is part of us being present in our neighborhoods. The Festival of Giving is part of being in a place where Jesus is also present, and we get to host him and his activity in our neighborhoods. What's the offering? What have you got in your group, at your hands, that you can bring to him to offer? When you gather, when you remind yourself, standing in a circle, as you're in your close circle with Jesus, as you're praying simple prayers of thanksgiving, like at the Eucharist, you're invoking his presence and inviting his presence every time you gather. And that is going to extend his reach. We eat and talk, and we make sure we invite his presence to be among us as we're gathering with our neighbours. Someone might be taking all the airwaves in those conversations because they've been in isolation and they want to talk. It's messy. Someone might be bringing a lot of mayhem to our tables, but you are the host, and you are the one that gets to gently encourage generosity around that table, inclusion around that table. You get to be present and to listen, and then bring your offering and watch how Jesus multiplies it. We are going to stay in that space. Yarra Valley Vineyard, we are going to push into that space, and we are going to make that a priority, that as we sit in circles where there are spaces in between for others to join us, we are going to eat together. We are going to be aware of our own forgiveness and our own reconciliation and renewal. And we're going to be aware of the generosity that we've received that flows through our relationships already. And we are going to also see the result of the overflow of the closeness of Jesus to us, reaching out to others, because that's who he is. And we're going to do that regularly, and we're going to do that with each other. And it takes time to cultivate mutual submission, and it takes time to tend to his presence as we gather. And in our neighbourhood circles, don't forget it takes time to do that as well. Build trust, listen, pay attention to his Spirit, and the gifts of his Spirit will be among you and set in motion as you do this regularly. And so the third section, the final section that the Holy Spirit's already leading us into, is what we want to call the half circle. If you think of a half circle, it's not complete, it's not fulfilled, it's missing something. And so this half circle represents the table that extends to the hurting, to the marginalized, and to those who God is highlighting in our communities. And so this half circle has a different posture. This half circle, we are no longer the host, we come as guests. In this half circle, we give up all control. We come as guests, and we submit to Christ's presence among us, and then we allow him to do the work. And so we pay attention to what Christ is doing. We attend to him and his activity, and we tend to his work. And Christ is here too, already doing something marvelous. And so the question here with the half circle is, what is Christ doing? Will Jesus be recognized, and will he be received? So if we turn to Luke 10, this is such a perfect example of how Jesus speaks to the presence and the spaces in our lives. That's a half circle. He sends out the 72 on mission in Luke 10, and he says, go out to every town, every place where he himself intended to go. We go to the places he intended to go. He already is on the move towards that, and he sends us to go to the place of intention. Here's where Jesus speaks in Luke 10. He instructs them. Jesus speaks and tells them how to participate. He tells them, enter a home, become present there, sitting around a table, eat everything that they provide. In verse 7, it says, eat whatever they provide. And so Jesus speaks again, and he says, go to those who are in need and that are not yet whole, and be present as guests. Be vulnerable like lambs in the midst of wolves. Verse 3, lambs into the midst of wolves. And he says, we need to give up our control. And Jesus speaks again and says, take the posture of receiving before you offer anything. Take the posture of receiving before you offer anything. And Jesus speaks again. He says, don't go from house to house, but stay present and find that person of peace. Jesus speaks. He says, eat what is set before you. He says, cure the sick. He says, tell them that the kingdom of God is near. And as we sit with people, the presence of Christ and his gospel proclaimed through our lives, the visible presence of Christ is extended, and Jesus speaks. Some of these incomplete tables or incomplete gatherings, these half circles, the fullness of Christ's presence is missing. Why is that? It's because no one is tending to Christ in those spaces. It takes someone who knows the stories and the reality around Christ's table, who's been close to Christ's presence, who knows his story, who knows his words, who knows that we come and we simply sit and be present, and then we learn to recognize his presence with us. And this is why the church has to continue to extend our table awareness into places of brokenness, into the half circles that need to be fulfilled. His presence makes it possible in those places to proclaim the good news. His presence, his faithful presence, can look like being in the places that are half circles. And so the Lord's table, it happens every time we have a meal together and we share together, and every time we tend to and attend to the presence of Jesus among us. And the formal communion table, the formal Lord's table that we've been missing, that's the closed circle table, that's the table of his friends. It's from there that it all extends. And that table is never out there or it's never here. That's a continual lived space that we're in among the world. All those circles are linked. And so I'm here, Yarra Valley Vineyard, reminding us today that we are not rushing back. We are not closing the circle as the only expression of how we will gather. We're actually now practicing what it means to be living in those spaces where there is a grace of the presence of Christ upon our communities as we come out of lockdown. And we get to practice those spaces together in mutual submission and under his lordship. It's not a maintenance mode we're in, Yarra Valley Vineyard. We are leaning into something that's strengthening us as a church community and as a kingdom people. And so we are expecting marvelous things that are going to happen in the close places where we're close to Jesus, in the dotted spaces where we are seeing our neighbors as onlookers and our neighbors that are approaching and coming towards Jesus and seeing his abundance and his generosity. And we're also expecting to see him in the half circles that are not fulfilled until we come as guests into their presence and show them who Jesus is. I'm going to just finish with a really quick story that I heard from a whole bunch of Bible colleges who put out a challenge, and they were at Bible school and they put out a challenge to say, I bet you can't give the whole of the Old Testament and the whole of the New Testament in 3 sentences each. 6 sentences totally. And they put their heads together, and the story goes that as they were thinking, that one Bible college student came up with the Old Testament. He said, here's my 3 sentences for the Old Testament. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. And then one of his friends said, hey, that's really good. What about for the New Testament then? Here's for the 3 sentences that summarize the New Testament. I love you. I forgive you. Let's eat. Jesus ate good food with not so good people. Jesus ate good food with all people. We are part of his faithful presence, reminding those that are close, reminding the onlookers, and reminding those who need him that Jesus is close and available to everyone. A new chapter is open and we are stepping into it. At the table, we don't just feed people, we build relationships. We build relationships and stories and memories. And we associate with people through their stories, and we hear their stories, and we create memories with them, and we create what becomes opportunities for them to experience the presence of Christ through our lives. And if we really want to learn someone's story, sitting down at a table, breaking bread together, that's the best way to start. So at the table today, I'm just reminding you that through isolation, my time of isolation became a time of participation. And we are now in a place where we're moving from isolation to participation. And all the stories and the studies and the memories that we are creating right now, we are leaning into new circles of strength as a community. We're having frequent family dinners. We're turning around the things that are missing. Yarra Valley Vineyard, let me encourage you. Jesus lived in a discipleship family that included all kinds of people, all walks of life. Jesus ate all kinds of food around all kinds of tables and in all kinds of places with all kinds of people. Jesus, his family includes married, singles, widows, orphans, lepers, sinners, even animals. And we're experiencing that. We've got a life group now that's for dogs and their owners, and it's going off. It's a time for all of God's family to be together. So whether in church or home or community, the table defines our identity. And so today I'm reminding us we have a table from which we gather. We have a table that's being extended and strengthened at this time. We're moving from isolation to participation. And we are going to see a dynamic in our Christian lives that's going to change as we realize that these circles all interlink. And as we realize that we have something to bring in each situation, and it takes a different posture in each of those spaces. I'm going to just pray a prayer right now that as you come close to Jesus, that you will have so much abundance in your life, that you will just see the overflow of relationships coming out of that. But I'm particularly aware that as I'm sharing this, some of you are not feeling like you're in a feast right now. It's been a really tough time. And I just want to pray this as we finish. And so I ask now, Jesus, as we posture ourselves to receive and come close to you, I ask that you would come and share your life through your Spirit, that you would come into our spaces right now and into our hearts right now and just restore whatever's missing. Father, for those who are feeling empty, for those who are feeling depleted, I ask now, release your Spirit, and may your Spirit come and minister to those areas of depletion. For those who are feeling like their best friend has just shut their door on their face and a relationship's been under strain, Jesus is right now pulling his chair out, standing up and inviting you to the table. There's a place for you at his table with him. For those of you who are feeling that everyone else has left the room and that Jesus is the only one left in your corner, this is the time where he's saying, I've saved a place for you. This is a place for you at my table. You've not been left alone. For those who are feeling that everybody's failed you, that there's been some hurt and disappointment through this time, Jesus is now taking you to his table. For those of you who are feeling like everything in life has actually failed right now, Jesus has reserved a special place at his table just for you. For those who have kids that perhaps want nothing more to do with you at this time or have moved away from your embrace, Jesus is saying he wants nothing more than you to sit at the table with him. For those of you who have an employer or who have lost jobs or have had an interruption with your vocation, and that you have an employer that wants nothing more to do with you, Jesus is saying, come and sit at the head of the table with me. This time is for you and me. So Lord, I just bless all the scenarios that we are experiencing right now, that we would find the closeness at your table, so that we would find the nourishment at your table, and that we would find new life at your table. And thank you, Lord, that with you, everything's included. Meals are included, and love is part of the sharing of the meal. So I just bless you guys at the end of this very long message. Thank you for hanging in there, but I hope that helps to understand the 3 different ways that we're seeing the Lord work at the moment as we move towards worshiping together and as we move towards meeting together in December. Lots of love.